What's up everyone, Pierre here from Into Fly Fishing, and welcome to our channel where we talk about all things fly fishing. If it's your first time visiting our channel, please consider subscribing to it and turning on those notifications. We would really love to share all our future videos with you to really discuss some interesting points and topics. I recently spent a day on the river with one of my very good friends, and we got to this pool and we could see fish were holding on the bottom. We couldn't get them to eat, and we ended up spending half a day there cycling through patterns and resting the fish and then cycling through patterns until we got a couple of them to eat. We had a lot of interesting conversations while we were changing flies and having lunch about when you should change flies and what triggers that sort of idea, okay, this is when I need to change flies. So I thought I might do a video on this to share you my thoughts on it. And if you have more questions or thoughts on it, please leave it in the comment section down below. I would love to hear your ideas on when you should change flies or when you shouldn't change flies. I think one of the most important things about fly fishing is being adaptable. It's almost like hunting. You need to be able to shoot far, shoot close when there's an animal that crosses the path very close to you. And this is the same in fly fishing. You need to be very adaptable. So while you rig your rig for the first time and you're setting up next to the river, plan that you know you can change flies, because if you don't plan that, if you don't leave enough tippet material, very often you'll find that you'll say, oh crap, I don't want to change flies now because I don't have enough tippet attached to the end of my leader, or I don't have the right flies with me or enough flies with me. So plan that you know you can change your flies with ease. A couple of things to plan and have ready to know that you can change flies is, firstly, make sure that you use tippet rings. Tippet rings prolongs the lifespan of your leader, so you don't eat up into your leader every time you change to a fresh piece of tippet. So use tippet rings. They are a game changer. They are a life changer. They're just amazing. Have a good range of flies for the specific water or species that you're targeting. So for instance, in a river that I fish, I have a good selection of dry flies in various colors, life forms and sizes, and the same with nymphs. I have a couple of caddis nymphs, mostly mayfly nymphs, but the big thing is different weights in nymphs and different sizes and colors. When you're tying in a fresh piece of tippet, tie it in long enough that you know you can use it for a couple of fly changes. Practice your knot so that you know you can change flies quickly, and have a couple of tippet size options with you on the water so that you can adapt quickly for the various sink rates or if a fish refuses your fly. In many cases, being adaptable on the water is what separates a really poor, slow, crap day and a very good, amazing day. So let's look at which scenarios you will encounter on the river that would prompt the thought of changing a fly. One of the most obvious indications of you needing to change your fly is if you get a solid refusal from a fish that you see. You spot a fish sitting in the current just under the surface. You have your whole rig set up. You have a nice dry and dropper rig set up. And your first cast is the most important. You need to absolutely nail it on the first cast. You make that cast, fly lands exactly in the right spot. Now you concentrate on the drift, and the fly drifts in the right lane, drag free, absolutely perfect. The fish swims over to your fly. It's the most beautiful scene you've ever seen, and it just turns. It refuses your fly. Now this is a great time to change your fly. Don't represent at that fish because you'll probably spook it. Stop, get your fly back to you, and change your fly. So now that you have your fly in your hand, you think, why did the fish reject this fly? So in most cases, I can't speak trout, so I haven't asked them, but my thought process is it either rejected it because it didn't want the fly, so it's an incorrect fly, or it became aware of the tippet material. So the tippet material is slightly harder to change the whole length than the fly, so I would first opt for a different fly. So I would always go 1 or 2 sizes smaller and a more natural color. That would be my first sort of move, and if I get a refusal again, I would do that again. one size smaller, another size smaller, and a different color. On the third pass, if the fish did not respond at all and didn't eat the fly, there's a good chance that it's rather because of your tippet material. So then what I'll do is rather remove that piece of tippet material, go to 1 or 2 sizes down, thinner diameter, tie on sort of the middle fly that you tried and represent and see if that works. In technical terms, matching the hatch means that we are presenting a fly to the fish that is imitating the exact insect, the size, the color, the movement, the profile, everything is exactly the same as what the fish are feeding on. In most cases, we say, oh, you're matching the hatch. It means that the fish are feeding on dry flies, but once again, technically, it doesn't only mean adult aquatic insects or dry flies. It can be subsurface flies too, especially if the fish are feeding on emergers. If you've spent any time on a trout stream, the chances are good that you've experienced it. You get to a pool and there are trout feeding everywhere, and you cast your dry fly and they just simply ignore it. Man, they'll even eat a dry fly next to your dry fly, or an insect next to your dry fly. It just completely refuses the dry fly that you are presenting to them. If there's a relatively small hatch coming off, matching the hatch can prove to be very effective because the fish are sitting and waiting for the adult mayflies or caddis or whatever to come towards them into the stream or through the stream, and it's not like there's constant amounts of food. They just respond to a mayfly drifting over them. This is when it really works because they zoned into that life form that you now have matched, and there's not a lot of them around, so every time they see one they respond. So this is when matching the hatch really works effectively. In my experience, I've seen that matching the hatch can be very ineffective. It's caused a lot of frustration to me because I'm matching the exact insect, the size, the color, the profile, the movement, everything. But because there are so many in a very large hatch, the fish are spoiled for choice. So unless you place it right on top of the fish, or it's sort of luck that he sees your fly and he eats it, the chance is very good that he'll simply just keep feeding on the same size flies that you are presenting. If you want to match the hatch or fish a hatch, you need a good understanding or good information about the river that you are fishing and the time of year so that you are prepared in terms of fly selection. If you tie your own flies, you're in luck because what you can do is make slight variations of your matching the hatch flies, in the sense that you can add a very small hotspot or even a little strand of UV flasher blue or something that could differentiate your fly or make your fly pop out to the fish. So to summarize matching the hatch, it means that we need to change to a fly that is similar to the natural insect in the same size, which is very important. Color could be very important, especially during the highest part of the day, like noon. Profile, super important, and movement. It's tough to give you a hard and fast rule to say exactly which fly to change to for which time of day, because there's so many factors that influence it. There's factors like the time of year, the climatic conditions, the pressure that the system receives in terms of angling, all of that kind of stuff. But here is my general rule of thumb that I use. During early morning and late afternoon, the fish tend to sit higher up in the water column. Now, this is the perfect opportunity to present a dry and drop rig. This is my preferred method for fishing this time of day. And what you do is, on the top you have a dry fly, and that's floating on the surface and it's covering that portion of the water column. And about 2 feet behind it you have a nymph that I usually weight with a 2.5 or a 2 millimeter tungsten bead, and that obviously covers that portion of the water column. So what you do is you generally don't pay that much attention to the color of the fly, but the most important factors are where the fly is fishing, that we just mentioned, the profile of the fly, so the profile of the dry fly that the fish sees from the bottom, and the profile of the nymph, and the overall size of the fly. As the day progresses, the fish tend to go into slightly deeper slots, or they hold deeper in a pool, and this is when I go to heavier nymphs, when I would go to Euro nymphing. And because there's so much more light, especially if you're fishing clear, gin clear streams, I pay a little bit more attention to the color. So early season I would go to pink, and then later season I would change that pink to slight orange, not necessarily fluorescent orange, but orange, like a rusty orange, and then late season to a natural. Now earlier we spoke about how to adapt or change your flies to a fish physically refusing your fly, and although that's not necessarily an easy thing to do or to know which pattern to go to, it does feel a little bit more intuitive because you have that physical feedback from the fish. Now if you need to adapt and change flies according to the depth or how fast the water is flowing, so a very deep pool that is fast flowing, it's harder to do because it's not as intuitive, but there are very hard and fast rules that you can follow that will really increase your catch rate. The reason why we can use these hard and fast rules is that the water is flowing very fast, so the fish don't have that much time to make a decision or to inspect your fly. They need to really react in a couple of split seconds, and then they eat the fly or they don't eat the fly. So they're not necessarily as fussy, or overall they're less fussy, so they need to make a reaction very quick. So all that we need to do is get the flies down to where they are holding and get the profile and the color generally right. So let's say you have a dry and dropper rig and you're approaching a very fast and deep run. You make a couple of casts, I would do that, and you fish, let's say 10 drifts, you get no reaction. Now you think there's no fish here, what's happening? There's a good chance that the fish has either not seen your fly because they're holding that deep, or they've seen it, but it will really cost them a lot of energy to go through all of this fast moving water to eat your fly. So it's all about preservation of energy. So if you want to become a very effective nymph angler or angler that fishes deep and fast runs, you need to understand how to get the fly right in front of that fish's nose. So from the dry and dropper rig, I would change to either a single nymph or a dual nymph, and there are a couple of things that influences the sink rate. Now, obviously the first is the weight of the fly. So if you're fishing a 2mm or a 2.5mm tungsten bead, I would go slightly heavier. So I would go to a 3 or a 3.5 or even a 4mm bead that would really get down. The other thing that influences the sink rate is the profile of the fly. A buggy fly just has so much more resistance than fishing a very slender profiled or a carrot profiled fly like a perdigon. And the other factor that many people forget is that the sink rate is very much determined or influenced by the diameter of the tippet that you use. If you're not getting to the bottom, the first move is to change to a heavier fly or a fly with a slender and a solid profile. This will get your fly down, but if you end up snagging on the bottom the whole time, you can use the same bead and maybe just go for a slightly buggier nymph. Once you have confidence that the fly is actually fishing in the right zone where the fish are holding, then you can start changing colors to see if you can get more takes. Just as important as it is to get the flies down to where the fish are holding in a very fast and deep run, it's just as important to get the flies in front of a fish in a shallow run. In this scenario, I immediately change over to a dry and dropper rig. My first combination is a very buoyant dry fly. So I'd go with a fly like a CDC and elk or a well-proofed CDC and elk that floats very high and solidly. And then behind that, about 2 feet behind that, I would attach a 2.5mm tungsten beaded fly. So if I keep snagging on the bottom with the tungsten beaded fly, I would go to a 2mm fly. And if I see that I'm not reaching the bottom, I would maybe go for a more slender pattern, but I would stick to about a 2.5mm in very shallow runs. Then it's important as you fish, pay very, very careful attention to your dry fly and to the area behind your dry fly where your nymph is swimming, because that will give you indication there might be a small flash, or you'd see a fish's head come up and then go down and didn't eat the fly. So then you start interacting in a more visual or a sight fishing way. Knowing when to change a fly and what to change to is almost just as important skill for a fly angler as it is to learn how to cast a fly. This is the essence of fly fishing, is presenting a fly, a imitating pattern or something that you made with your hands to a fish and making it believe that it is the real deal. Although it's a skill that you would have to learn mostly by yourself with hours on the water, I hope that this video has shed some thoughts on it, or at least sort of sparked an idea on how and when to change flies. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications, then we can let you know as soon as we release any future videos like these. Until next time, cheers.